She woke up to find the Mafia boss wearing her clothes. What he said left her frozen. The exhaustion that settled into Jenna Cole's bones was not the kind that a single night of sleep could cure. It was a heavy, accumulating weight, built layer by layer over months of double shifts and sleepless nights. She had spent the last 10 hours on her feet at the retail store, folding denim until her fingers felt raw, only to come home and hunch over her sewing machine for another 3 hours to finish a freelance alteration for a client who probably would not pay her on time. When she finally collapsed onto her mattress, she did not even have the energy to wash her face. The city noises outside her window, the rattle of the elevated train, the distant wail of sirens, the shouting of a couple on the street corner usually kept her awake. Tonight, however, the silence inside her own head was louder. She was drowning in the mathematics of survival. $200 for the electric bill. $600 left on her mother's nursing home fee for the month. $40 for groceries. The numbers swirled in the darkness behind her eyelids until they finally dragged her down into a deep, dreamless void. She did not know what woke her. It was not a sound. It was a change in the air pressure of the room, a shift in the shadows that her subconscious registered before her mind could catch up. Jenna blinked, her eyes gritty and heavy. The digital clock on her nightstand read 3 in the morning. The streetlights outside filtered through her thin, cheap curtains, casting long, warped shapes across the peeling wallpaper of her studio apartment. She shifted, intending to roll over and bury her face in the pillow. But her movement froze instantly. There was someone in her room. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded her system, chasing away the fog of sleep in a heartbeat. She pushed herself up against the headboard, her breath catching in her throat. Standing at the foot of her bed was a silhouette that took up far too much space for her tiny apartment. The man was massive, his shoulders broad enough to block out the view of the window behind him. He stood with a stillness that was unnatural, like a predator waiting for the wind to change. Jenna squinted, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, the details of the intruder began to resolve, but they made no sense. The image before her was so absurd, so terrified and disjointed, that she thought she might still be dreaming. The man was wearing her clothes. He was squeezed into her favorite oversized gray cable-knit sweater. The fabric stretched taut across a chest that was clearly twice the size of her own. The sleeves, which usually hung past her fingertips, barely reached his forearms, exposing thick, corded muscles covered in dark hair. Below that, he wore her black leggings. On her, they were loungewear. On him, they looked like a second skin, straining against powerful thighs and calves to cap off the surreal nightmare. He had one of her pink velvet scrunchies around his wrist. Jenna's gaze traveled up to his face, and the absurdity vanished, replaced by a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror. She knew that face. Everyone in the city knew that face. It belonged to the man who reportedly ran the docks, the unions, and the underground gambling rings. It was a face she had seen on the news, usually accompanied by the words alleged and indictment. Nico Varelli. His dark hair was damp, plastered to his forehead as if he had been running or sweating profusely. There was a smear of something dark and crusty at his hairline, dried blood. His jaw was set in a hard, grim line, and his eyes, dark as the night outside, were locked onto her with terrifying intensity. But what made her blood turn to ice was the object resting casually on her cluttered dresser, right next to her jewelry box, a gun. It was black, matte, and terrifyingly real. Jenna opened her mouth to scream. The instinct was primal, a surge of air rushing from her lungs to sound the alarm, to beg for help, to do something other than die in a pair of mismatched pajamas. Nico moved before the sound could leave her throat. He crossed the small room in 2 quick, silent strides that defied his size. Before Jenna could scramble back, his hand clamped over her mouth. It was a large, rough hand, smelling of leather and metallic residue, but the pressure was surprisingly controlled. He did not slam her head back. He simply sealed her lips with a firmness that allowed no argument. "Do not scream," he commanded. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating through the quiet room. It was not a shout, but the authority in it was absolute. Jenna trembled beneath his touch, her hands gripping the sheets, her eyes wide with panic. "I'm going to take my hand away," Nico said, his face inches from hers. "If you scream, you will bring the police. If the police come, the men waiting outside will open fire, and we will both be dead before they even get through the door. Do you understand?" Jenna stared at him, tears of shock pricking the corners of her eyes. She gave a jerky, terrified nod. Slowly, carefully, Nico lifted his hand. He did not step back, however. He stayed close, his presence overwhelming in the small space. "What are you doing here?" Jenna whispered, her voice shaking so hard the words barely formed. "Why are you wearing my clothes?" Nico glanced down at himself, a flicker of something like irritation passing over his features. He tugged at the hem of the gray sweater, which was riding up his waist. "I had to ditch my suit in the alley 3 blocks over," he said, the explanation coming out clipped and fast. "It was covered in blood. I came in through your fire escape. I grabbed what was drying on the rack." "You stole my leggings," Jenna said, the hysteria bubbling up in her throat. "Nico Varelli is wearing my leggings." "Focus," Nico snapped, his eyes snapping back to hers. "This is not a fashion statement. There are men watching the security feeds of this building. They are looking for a man in a bespoke Italian suit. They are looking for a target they recognize. If I walk out of here looking like myself, snipers on the roof across the street will take the shot. But they will not expect the head of the Varelli family to be walking out in a hoodie and yoga pants." Jenna pressed her back against the headboard, pulling her knees up to her chest. "Get out," she choked out. "Just get out. I don't know you. I don't want to know you. Take the clothes. Just leave me alone." Nico's expression darkened. He ran a hand through his damp hair, wincing slightly as he touched the cut on his forehead. "I wish it were that simple," he said. "But the situation has changed." "What do you mean?" "The hit was supposed to be on me," Nico said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. "I was ambushed leaving the club downtown. I got away, but I intercepted their communications before I ditched my phone. The contract has been altered." Jenna shook her head, confusion warring with fear. "What does that have to do with me?" Nico looked at her then, and for the first time, the iron mask of the Mafia boss cracked. Something akin to regret flashed in his eyes. He reached into the pocket of the leggings, stretching the fabric dangerously, and pulled out a sleek, cracked smartphone. He tapped the screen and turned it toward her. "Look," he said. Jenna leaned forward, her eyes straining in the dim light. It was a photograph. A grainy, zoomed-in shot taken from across the street. It showed her leaving the clothing store where she worked, her head down, carrying her purse. Her name, Jenna Cole, was typed in bold red letters at the bottom, along with her address. "Someone twisted the contract," Nico said, his voice void of emotion, though his jaw was clenched tight. "They put a price on your life. They know I am here. They know I am cornered. They figured out that the best way to flush me out isn't to storm the room, but to threaten the civilian I am with." "Me?" Jenna's voice rose to a squeak. "I'm nobody. I fold shirts for $12 an hour. I have debt. I have nothing to do with your world." "You do now," Nico said grimly. "This is a mistake," she insisted, pushing the phone away. "You have the wrong person. I don't know you." "You remember 6 months ago?" Nico asked suddenly. Jenna blinked. "What?" "6 months ago," Nico repeated. "It was raining. A man came into your store. He had torn his jacket. He needed a shirt for a meeting in 10 minutes. You fixed him up." Jenna searched her memory. She remembered. A scary-looking man, wide as a door, had come in panicking about a stain on his shirt. She had quickly styled him in a fresh button-down and a blazer, pinned the hem so it fit, and sent him on his way. She had treated him with the same polite efficiency she treated everyone. "I remember," she said. "So what?" "That was my capo," Nico said. "I was waiting in the car outside. I watched you through the window. I watched how you worked. You were calm. You had an eye for detail. I looked for too long." Jenna stared at him, her mouth falling open. "My rivals have been monitoring me," Nico continued, his voice rougher now. "They saw me watching you. They saw me send a car to park on your street a few times just to make sure you got home safe when the neighborhood got rough. I never approached you. I never spoke to you. But in my world, attention is dangerous. They decided you were my weakness, and tonight, to break me, to force me to surrender, they added your name to the kill list." The silence that followed was deafening. Jenna felt the room spin. He had been watching her? This dangerous, violent man had been watching her from the shadows? And because of that, because of his twisted version of admiration, she was now a target? "You ruined my life, she whispered, the realization crashing down on her. "You didn't even say hello, and you ruined my life. I'm trying to save it," Nico said. "That is why I am here." A sudden, sharp thud echoed from the hallway outside her apartment door. Jenna flinched violently, a gasp tearing from her throat. In a split second, Nico was in motion. He moved with terrifying speed, stepping between Jenna and the door, his body becoming a human shield. He snatched the gun from the dresser, his demeanor shifting instantly from regretful narrator to lethal protector. "They are in the building," Nico hissed, his voice low and urgent. "Get up. Now." "I can't," Jenna stammered, paralyzed by the sudden escalation. "My things. My mom." "Your mother is safe where she is," Nico said, not looking at her, his eyes trained on the wooden door as if he could see through it. "But if we stay here, everyone in this building dies. These men do not leave witnesses. If they breach that door, they will burn this place down to cover their tracks. We have to leave. Tonight." He turned to her, and the intensity of his gaze pulled her out of her paralysis. "Jenna, move." She scrambled out of bed, her legs shaking so badly she almost fell. She was wearing only an oversized t-shirt and underwear. She looked around frantically, her mind blank. "Grab a bag," Nico ordered, checking the safety on his weapon. "Essentials only. No electronics that can be tracked. Do you have cash?" "A little," she said. Grabbing her worn duffel bag from the closet floor, she threw in a pair of jeans, a sweater, and 2 clean shirts. She reached for her sketchbook, the one with all her designs, her dreams for a future that suddenly felt 1,000,000 miles away, and shoved it in. Nico was beside her suddenly, his large presence crowding her. "Faster," he urged. He reached past her to grab a handful of items from her dresser, sweeping them into the bag. His hand brushed against the open drawer of her dresser, her underwear drawer. His knuckles grazed the silk and lace of her intimate apparel. For a second, the chaos of the moment suspended. Nico froze, his hand hovering over the delicate fabrics. Jenna felt a rush of heat flood her cheeks, a bizarre, hot spike of embarrassment cutting through the fear. She looked up, and he looked down. Their eyes met. In the midst of a hit, with killers in the hallway and a gun in his hand, Nico Varelli looked at her with a raw, unguarded heat that stole the breath from her lungs. It wasn't the look of a predator. It was the look of a man suddenly, painfully aware of the woman standing next to him. He cleared his throat, the sound rough, and jerked his gaze away. "Move," he said, his voice gruff, the professional mask slamming back into place. "Boots, coat, let's go." Jenna shoved her feet into her boots, not bothering with the laces. She grabbed her coat. Nico took the duffel bag from her, slinging it over the shoulder covered by her gray sweater. "Stay behind me," he instructed. "Hold on to the back of my shirt. If I stop, you stop. If I tell you to run, you run until your lungs burn. Do not look back." He opened the apartment door a crack, peering into the hallway. It was empty, but the heavy silence felt pregnant with violence. He signaled for her to follow. They moved into the corridor. The air was cold and smelled of stale cigarette smoke. Nico guided her toward the rear stairwell, away from the elevators. His hand came up to rest on the small of her back. Even through the thin fabric of her t-shirt and coat, his hand was scorching hot. It was a heavy, possessive weight that guided her, pushed her, and shielded her all at once. Jenna felt a tremble run through her spine, partly from the terror of what lay in the shadows, and partly from the surreal, electric intimacy of the moment. She was running for her life with a Mafia boss. He was wearing her clothes. He had just admitted he had been watching her for months, and now his hand was on her body, guiding her into the dark. As they descended the concrete stairs, their footsteps silent, Jenna looked at the broad expanse of his back in front of her. The gray sweater strained as he moved, the gun held ready at his side. The legend of Nico Varelli was a terrifying story told in whispers across the city, a story of blood and power, but the man in front of her, warm, solid, and smelling of danger, was terrifyingly real. And for the first time in her life, Jenna Cole realized that the monsters under the bed were not only real, but they might be the only thing standing between her and the abyss. "Step lightly," Nico murmured, his voice barely a breath against the damp air of the stairwell. "We are almost at the exit." Jenna tightened her grip on the back of her own sweater that he was wearing and stepped into the night. The drive out of the city was a blur of passing streetlights and silence. Nico drove a nondescript sedan that had been waiting 3 blocks from Jenna's apartment, his movements behind the wheel precise and aggressive. Jenna sat in the passenger seat, her knees pulled up to her chest, staring out the window as the familiar skyline of her life faded into the darkness. She was still wearing her coat over her pajamas, clutching the strap of her duffel bag as if it were a lifeline. They drove for nearly an hour, moving away from the dense grid of the city and into the industrial outskirts where the buildings turned into hulking shadows of concrete and steel. Nico finally slowed the car, turning down an unpaved road that led toward the river. He pulled up to a massive, renovated warehouse that looked like a fortress. The windows were high and barred, and the steel door looked thick enough to stop a tank. "We are here," Nico said, killing the engine. Jenna shivered. Not from cold, but from the desolate look of the place. It looked like exactly the kind of place a Mafia boss would take someone to make them disappear. But when Nico keyed in a code and ushered her inside, Jenna stopped dead in her tracks. The interior was nothing like the cold, industrial shell outside. It was a sprawling, open-concept loft with polished concrete floors warmed by Persian rugs. The high ceilings were crisscrossed with wooden beams, and the walls were lined, floor to ceiling, with books. There were plants everywhere, massive ferns and trailing vines that breathed life into the space. A grand piano sat in one corner, and the furniture was worn leather, inviting and comfortable. It smelled of old paper, mahogany, and rain. "This is yours?" Jenna asked, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "It is the one place no one looks for me," Nico said, locking the heavy steel door behind them with a resounding clank. "The deed is under a shell company owned by a ghost. You are safe here." He walked further into the room, and Jenna watched him. He had shed her gray sweater and leggings in the car, changing into a spare set of clothes he kept in the trunk, black jeans and a dark thermal shirt that fit him properly. The return to his own clothes seemed to restore some of his armor, but the memory of him in her fuzz-covered knitwear was burned into her brain, making him seem confusingly human. A man emerged from a hallway in the back of the loft. He was younger than Nico, with sharp features and alert eyes, carrying a tablet. This was Marco. "Boss," Marco said, nodding to Nico before turning his gaze to Jenna. He did not look surprised to see a woman in pajama bottoms standing in the middle of the safe house. He looked calculated, assessing threats. "Marco," Nico said, his voice dropping to that low, commanding register that made Jenna's stomach flip. "This is Jenna Cole. She's staying with us." Marco nodded again. "I will set up the guest protocols." "No protocols," Nico corrected him sharply. "You will treat Jenna as if she were the most important person in the building. She's not a prisoner. She's not a guest. She's under my personal protection. If she needs anything, food, clothes, a book to read, you get it for her immediately. Do you understand?" Jenna bristled, her spine straightening, the way he spoke about her, like she was a rare artifact he had just acquired, made heat rise in her neck. "I'm standing right here," she said, her voice cutting through the male-dominated atmosphere. "I can hear you." Nico turned to her, his expression unreadable. I know you can. I am making sure Marco knows where the priorities lie. I am not a priority, Jenna snapped. The stress of the night finally finding a target. I am a hostage. You dragged me out of my home. I pulled you out of a fire, Nico countered, his patience thinning but holding. Marco, give us the room. Marco vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Nico walked over to a small bar cart and poured 2 glasses of water. Not alcohol. He brought one to Jenna. She hesitated, then took it, her hands trembling slightly. She was thirsty, terrified, and exhausted. Sit, Nico said, gesturing to the oversized leather sofa. We need to talk. Jenna remained standing, clutching the glass. I do not want to sit. I want you to tell me exactly why my name is on a hit list. You said you watched me. What does that mean? Nico sighed, a sound that seemed to come from the bottom of his lungs. He sat down heavily on the couch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, scrubbing his face with his hands. He looked tired, not just sleepy, but soul-weary. The Carvelli clan has been trying to take my territory for 2 years, Nico began, looking up at her. They are brutal. They lack code. They do not care who gets hurt. 6 months ago, after I saw you in the store, I made a mistake. You made a mistake, Jenna asked, her voice rising. I started paying attention, Nico admitted. I liked the way you worked. You were focused. You dealt with rude customers with a grace I do not possess. You worked double shifts and never complained. It was... He paused, looking away, and for the first time, Jenna saw a flush of color high on his cheekbones. It was calming to watch you. You were building something, creating things. My life is about destruction. Watching you felt like looking through a window into a world I am not allowed to touch. Jenna stared at him, stunned. The ruthless crime lord was telling her he liked watching her fold clothes because it was peaceful. So you stalked me, Jenna said flatly. I had security keep an eye on your street, Nico corrected, though he looked almost embarrassed. Your neighborhood is not safe at night. I had a car sit on the corner to make sure you got from the bus stop to your door. I never intervened. I never learned your phone number or your friends' names. I just wanted to make sure you were safe. You had no right, Jenna shouted, slamming the glass down on a coaster. She began to pace the length of the rug, her arms wrapped tight around herself. That is not romantic. Nico, that is terrifying. You watched me without my permission. You invaded my life. And because you decided to play guardian angel from the shadows, these Carvelli people noticed? Yes, Nico said quietly. They noticed that I had resources allocated to a nobody in a retail store. They did the math. They assumed you were my mistress or my lover. They assumed you mattered. And now I am going to die because of a misunderstanding, Jenna whispered, the anger draining out of her, replaced by a cold, hollow dread. She stopped pacing and looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. I am just a seamstress, Nico. I have to pay my mom's bills. I have a cat I need to feed. I cannot be in a mafia war. The reality of it crashed into her. Her apartment was compromised. Her job was dangerous. Her face was on a list. She was trapped in a warehouse with a man who carried a gun for a living. A sob broke from her throat, sharp and jagged. Nico moved instantly. He stood up and crossed the space between them, but he did not grab her. He stopped a foot away, his hands hovering uncertainly in the air. Jenna, he said, his voice rough. I am sorry. He looked like he wanted to touch her, but was afraid he would taint her with the violence that clung to him. Jenna's knees gave way, and she sank onto the edge of the couch, burying her face in her hands. She wept, the tears hot and fast, the stress of the last 4 hours pouring out of her. The cushion beside her dipped. Nico sat down. He was close, his thigh almost brushing hers. I never wanted this for you, he murmured. I thought I was keeping the distance. I thought I was just looking. Slowly, tentatively, he reached out. His fingers, calloused and warm, brushed against her wet cheek. He wiped away a tear with his thumb. The touch was shocking in its gentleness. It was not the touch of a man who broke bones. It was the touch of a man who was terrified of breaking her. Jenna froze, her breath catching in a hiccup. She looked up at him through wet lashes. Nico was watching her with an expression of such profound guilt and fierce determination that it stole the air from the room. "I will fix this," he vowed, his thumb lingering on her cheekbone. "I swear to you, Jenna, I will fix this." Boom. A crack of thunder shook the entire warehouse, so loud it vibrated in Jenna's chest. The lights in the loft flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging them into pitch blackness. Jenna gasped, instinctually reaching out. Her hand found Nico's solid forearm. "It is just the storm." Nico's voice came from the dark, steady and calm. "The generator will kick in." A second later, the emergency lights buzzed to life. They cast a dim, amber glow over the room, creating deep shadows and throwing the angles of Nico's face into sharp relief. The rain began to hammer against the metal roof, a deafening, rhythmic roar that isolated them from the rest of the world. Jenna shivered, the temperature in the room dropping with the power outage. Without a word, Nico shifted. He reached for the throw blanket on the back of the couch and draped it over her shoulders, but he didn't pull his hand back. Instead, his arm settled around her, drawing her in. Jenna stiffened for a second, but the warmth radiating from him was magnetic. She was cold, she was scared, and he was the only solid thing in a world that had turned liquid. She let herself lean into him, her shoulder pressed against his chest. She could feel the steady, slow thump of his heart against her side. "Breathe," Nico whispered, his head bowed near hers. "Just breathe." They sat like that for a long time, the storm raging outside, the amber light bathing them in a false sunset. The silence between them changed texture. It stopped being awkward and started to feel heavy, charged with something dangerous. Jenna turned her head slightly to look at him. At this distance, she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. She could see the rough texture of his stubble and the small scar on his chin. Nico turned to look at her at the same moment. Their faces were inches apart. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Jenna felt a rush of heat travel up her throat. It was a treacherous, confusing sensation. This man had kidnapped her, saved her. Yes, but also kidnapped her. He was a criminal. He was dangerous. And yet, looking at his mouth, all she could think about was what it would feel like to bridge the small gap between them. Nico's gaze dropped. He looked at her lips, his eyes darkening, his pupils dilating in the low light. His hand, which had been resting on her shoulder, tightened slightly, his thumb grazing the side of her neck. "Jenna," he breathed, her name sounding like a prayer or a curse on his tongue. He leaned in, a fraction of an inch. Jenna's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every nerve ending in her body was singing, tingling with a mixture of anticipation and fear. She wanted him to kiss her. The realization was horrifying. She wanted him to kiss her, and that made no sense. She felt his breath on her cheek, warm and smelling of mint and rain. "This is insane," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You turned my life upside down in one night. You cannot do this." Nico stopped. He froze, his lips a breath away from hers, his jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. The desire in his eyes was still there, burning hot, but he squeezed his eyes shut for a second and exhaled slowly. He pulled back, not far, just enough to put a respectable distance between them, but he did not take his arm away. His thumb continued to stroke her shoulder through the blanket, a small, rhythmic motion that felt like an apology. "You are right," Nico said, his voice gravelly. "I'm sorry. I forget myself." He cleared his throat and sat up straighter, putting physical and emotional distance between them. He looked at the far wall, his profile sharp and unyielding. "We need a plan," he said, shifting into business mode, though his voice was still tight. "We cannot stay in this warehouse forever. If we hide, they will think I am weak. If they think I am weak, they will attack my businesses, my men. They will burn the city down to find us." Jenna wiped her face, pulling the blanket tighter. "So what do we do?" "We hide in plain sight," Nico said. He turned back to her, his expression serious. "There are 3 major charity galas and social events in the next 2 weeks. The Carvellis will be there. They cannot shoot me in a ballroom full of senators and judges. I need to be there to show strength. Okay, Jenna said slowly. But what about me? You are coming with me, Nico said. As my girlfriend. Jenna's eyes widened. What? It is the only cover that explains why you are suddenly by my side, Nico explained, his hands gesturing as he laid out the logic. If I hide you, they will keep hunting you to use as leverage. If I bring you out, if I put my arm around you and claim you publicly, it sends a message. It says I have her, and if you touch her, I will kill you. It turns you from a weakness into a declaration of war. You want me to pretend to date you? Jenna asked incredulously. In front of the people who want to kill us? I need more than a prop. Jenna, Nico said, leaning in again, urgent now. You have an eye. You saw a loose thread on a jacket from across a store. You notice details. At these events, people wear masks. They smile while they hold knives. I need someone who can watch the room while I watch the exits. I need you to spot the things that do not fit. A waiter with the wrong shoes. A guest wearing a suit that does not tailor right because he is hiding a wire or a weapon. You can do that. Jenna stared at him. He was offering her a job. A dangerous, terrifying job, but a job nonetheless. He wasn't telling her to hide in a basement. He was asking her to stand next to him. I don't know, she stammered. I cannot force you, Nico said. But if you go back to your life now, I cannot guarantee I can stop them. If you stay with me, I swear on my life, I will not let anyone touch you. Jenna looked at the man sitting next to her, the monster who wore her sweater, the protector who wiped her tears, the strategist who wanted to use her fashion sense as a weapon. She took a deep breath. The idea of returning to her apartment alone, waiting for a bullet, was impossible. Okay, she said softly. I will do it. Nico let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a long time. Good. But I have conditions, Jenna added, her voice gaining strength. Nico cocked his head. Name them. First, I am not a possession, she said firmly. I am not a parcel. You move around. I need my own space. I need to be able to make calls. Monitored, fine. But I need to talk to my mom. And second, you never make a decision about my life behind my back again. If we are in danger, you tell me. If there is a plan, I know it. No more watching from the shadows. We are partners. Or I walk out that door and take my chances. Nico looked at her for a long moment, studying her face. A flicker of genuine respect crossed his eyes. Agreed, he said solemnly. Partners. He stood up. The moment of intimacy broken, but the connection between them forged into something stronger. There is a guest room down the hall. It has a lock on the inside. Get some sleep. We have a lot of work to do tomorrow. Jenna nodded and stood up, clutching the blanket. She walked toward the hallway, but paused at the entrance. She looked back. Nico was standing in the dim amber light of the emergency backup, watching her. He looked lonely. Good night, Nico, she said. Good night, Jenna, he replied. Jenna went into the guest room and locked the door. The room was nice. Clean sheets, a soft duvet, another bookshelf. She crawled into bed, exhausted, but sleep was elusive. She closed her eyes, but all she could feel was the phantom warmth of his arm around her shoulders. She could still smell the rain and leather. She could still feel the ghost of his thumb stroking her skin. The fear of the hit list was there. Yes, but it was now tangled with a confusing, thrumming awareness of the man in the other room, on the other side of the wall. Nico Varelli lay awake on his own bed. He stared at the ceiling, one arm thrown over his eyes. He could still feel the weight of her head on his chest. He could feel the softness of her hair against his chin. He had told her it was a strategy. He had told her it was about leverage and optics. But as he lay there in the dark, listening to the storm pound against the roof, Nico knew he was lying to himself. He didn't just want to protect her because she was a civilian caught in his crossfire. He wanted to protect her because when she looked at him, he felt like a man who could be redeemed, and that terrified him more than any assassin ever could. The transformation took 3 hours, but for Jenna, it felt less like getting ready for a party and more like putting on war paint. The safe-house bedroom was scattered with pins, thread clippings, and the remnants of a sewing kit Marco had procured for her earlier that morning. In the center of the chaos stood Jenna, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The dress Marco had brought her was originally a shapeless, expensive sack of black silk, something designed to hide a woman, not define her. Jenna had taken one look at it, felt the panic of being erased rising in her chest, and had gone to work. She had taken the hem up, altering the silhouette to hug her frame with a dangerous precision. She had gathered the excess fabric at the waist, creating a sleek, asymmetrical drape that exposed one shoulder and the graceful line of her collarbone. It was no longer just a dress. It was armor. It was sharp, elegant, and undeniably bold. Jenna took a deep breath, smoothing the silk over her hips. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Tonight, she was not Jenna Cole, the invisible retail assistant with mounting debt. Tonight, she was the companion of a crime lord, walking into a den of lions with nothing but a cover story and a pair of high heels to protect her. She opened the door and stepped out into the main loft. Nico was waiting by the steel-reinforced door. He was pacing, checking his watch, his back to her. He had traded the casual clothes and the absurdity of her borrowed sweater for a bespoke charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. He looked lethal. The cut of the jacket emphasized the width of his shoulders, and the crisp white shirt contrasted sharply against his tan skin. He turned as he heard her footsteps, a command to hurry already forming on his lips. The words died in his throat. Nico stopped mid-motion. His arms fell to his sides, and he went completely still. His gaze started at her heels, traveled up the long line of her legs, over the curve of her hip where the silk gathered, and finally rested on her face. For a man who made his living by never showing weakness or surprise, the look on his face was startlingly open. It was a mixture of shock and a raw, hungry admiration that made the air in the room suddenly feel thin. "Is it too much?" Jenna asked, her voice faltering slightly under the weight of his stare. "I had to alter it. It was drowning me." Nico cleared his throat, the sound rough. He took a step toward her, his eyes dark. "No," he said, his voice lower than usual. "It is not too much. You look—" He paused, searching for a word that wouldn't betray how much she affected him. "You look dangerous." "Good," Jenna said, lifting her chin. "If I am going to be a target, I might as well look like I can handle myself." Nico's jaw tightened, a flicker of guilt passing through his eyes, but he nodded. "Let's go. The car is waiting." The ride to the gala was suffocatingly quiet. They sat in the back of an armored SUV with tinted windows, the city lights blurring past in streaks of gold and neon. Jenna sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap. Her fingers were cold, trembling with a fine vibration she couldn't stop. Every time the car slowed or turned, her mind flashed back to the terrifying moment in her apartment, the gun on the dresser, the feeling of being hunted. She felt a warmth settle over her left hand. She looked down. Nico had covered her clenched hands with his own. His hand was large, enveloping hers completely. His skin was warm and dry, a stark contrast to her icy nerves. He didn't look at her. He kept his gaze on the road ahead, scanning the perimeter, but his thumb began to move. Slow, deliberate circles, over and over. His thumb rubbed against her knuckles, a rhythmic, grounding motion that anchored her to the present. "Breathe," Nico murmured, his voice a low rumble in the quiet cabin. "You are hyperventilating." "I am not cut out for this," Jenna whispered, staring at their joined hands. "I fold sweaters. Nico, I do not go to parties with people who kill other people." "You are stronger than you think," Nico said. And this time he turned to look at her. The streetlights washed over his face, highlighting the sharp angle of his cheekbone. "And I meant what I said. I will not let anything happen to you. You are right next to me. Anyone who wants to get to you has to go through me first." His voice was husky, layered with a fierce promise that sent a shiver racing down Jenna's spine. It wasn't just a reassurance of safety. It sounded possessive. It sounded like an oath. "We are arriving," the driver announced from the front. Nico gave her hand one last firm squeeze before releasing it. "Showtime," he said. "Stay close." The gala was held in the ballroom of a historic hotel, a cavernous space dripping with crystal chandeliers and filled with the murmur of hundreds of people. The air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and the metallic tang of hidden ambition. As they walked through the entrance, Jenna felt the weight of 100 eyes landing on them. She instinctively moved closer to Nico, and his response was immediate. His hand settled on the small of her back. His fingers splayed wide against the silk of her dress. It was a claim. It steered her, supported her, and signaled to everyone in the room that she was with him. "Smile," Nico whispered, leaning down so his lips brushed her ear. His breath was warm against her neck, causing goosebumps to rise on her arms. "You are bored. You are beautiful. You are with me." Jenna forced a smile onto her face, channeling every ounce of courage she had. She let her eyes roam the room, but she wasn't looking at the decor. She was doing what Nico had asked. She scanned the crowd. To the left, a group of men in tuxedos were laughing, but their eyes were cold, scanning the room over the rims of their glasses. To the right, a woman in red was standing too close to a senator, her hand on his arm, her posture rigid. "The man by the pillar," Jenna murmured, leaning into Nico as if sharing a romantic secret. "His suit does not fit." Nico glanced over, his expression unchanging. "Which one?" "The one in the navy jacket," Jenna said softly. "The left side of the jacket hangs lower than the right. The fabric is pulling. He's carrying something heavy in the inside pocket." Nico's hand tightened imperceptibly on her waist. "Good eye," he whispered back. "That is one of the distinct attorneys for the Carvelli family. He's likely recording. Stay away from him." They moved through the crowd like a single entity. The cover story demanded physical closeness, and Nico used it to his advantage. When a waiter moved too quickly with a tray, Nico shifted his body to block Jenna. When a rival associate approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, Nico pulled Jenna flush against his side, his arm banding around her waist like an iron bar. Jenna's heart was beating wildly, a confusing, chaotic rhythm. She was terrified, yes, but she was also hyper-aware of the man beside her. She felt the hardness of his chest against her shoulder. She smelled the sandalwood and musk of his cologne. Every time he touched her, guiding her, protecting her, a jolt of electricity shot through her that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the man himself. "Nico, darling!" The voice was high, sharp, and dripping with false sweetness. Nico stiffened. Jenna felt the tension radiate through his frame instantly. They turned to see a woman approaching them. She was stunning, with cascading dark hair and a gold sequined dress that left little to the imagination. Her eyes were fixed on Nico with a predatory familiarity. "Bianca," Nico said, his tone flat. "I haven't seen you in months." Bianca purred, stepping into their personal space. She reached out, sliding her manicured hand up the sleeve of Nico's jacket, her fingers lingering on his bicep. She pointedly ignored Jenna, acting as if the space beside Nico was empty. "I heard you were having trouble. I thought you might need a friend." Jenna stood there, feeling the heat of humiliation rise in her cheeks. This was obviously an ex. The history between them was palpable in the way Bianca touched him. Confident and entitled, Jenna felt small, an imposter in a dress she had sewn herself. Nico did not step back, but he reached up and firmly removed Bianca's hand from his arm. "I'm not looking for friends, Bianca," Nico said coolly. "Oh, come on." Bianca laughed, finally flicking a dismissive glance toward Jenna. "Don't tell me you're actually busy. And who is this? Another stylist you picked up to fix your tie?" The insult landed with precision. Jenna opened her mouth to defend herself, to say something sharp, but Nico beat her to it. "This is Jenna," Nico said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly register. He shifted his stance, turning slightly to block Bianca's view of Jenna, moving his hand from Jenna's back to rest possessively on her hip. "She's not just my stylist. She's my girlfriend." Bianca's smile faltered. "Girlfriend? You don't do girlfriends." "Nico." "Things change," Nico said, his eyes hard. "We are enjoying the evening. Excuse us." He didn't wait for a response. He guided Jenna away, his grip on her hip firm, steering her toward a quieter corridor away from the main ballroom. As soon as they were out of earshot of the crowd, the dynamic shifted. The protective warmth turned into a sharp, vibrating tension. Jenna pulled away from him, stepping out of his hold. Her heart was racing, fueled by the adrenaline of the confrontation and a sudden, sharp spike of jealousy she had no right to feel. "You were very good at that," Jenna said, her voice tight. "Good at what?" Nico asked, watching her closely. "Lying," Jenna snapped. "She is not just a stylist, she's my girlfriend. You said it so easily." "It is the cover, Jenna," Nico said, loosening his tie slightly as if the air in the corridor was too thick. "We agreed on this." "It felt like you were enjoying it," Jenna accused, the stress of the night finally spilling over. "Parading me around, using me to make your ex jealous, using me to show your enemies you have a shiny new toy. Is that all I am to you? Nico? A prop, a human shield in a nice dress." Nico stopped. His expression darkened, a storm gathering in his eyes. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, backing her toward the wall. He didn't touch her, but his presence was overwhelming. "Do not say that," he growled. "Why not?" Jenna poked a finger into his solid chest, her anger overriding her fear. "It is the truth. You dragged me here. You dressed me up. You are moving me around like a chess piece because you need to look strong. You do not care about me. You care about winning. You think I do not care?" Nico's voice rose, cracking with frustration. "You think I am doing this for my reputation. I am doing this to keep you alive. I am tired of being kept alive," Jenna shouted back, her voice echoing in the empty hallway. "I want to live. And I cannot do that when you are controlling every single breath I take. I'm trying to control the chaos," Nico snapped. He moved closer, his chest almost brushing hers, forcing her to look up at him. "Do you have any idea what it does to me? Seeing you in this room, seeing them look at you? Every time a man looks at you tonight, I want to break his hands. Every time you are out of my reach, I cannot breathe." Jenna stared at him, her breath hitching. That is just the job. Nico, that is the leverage." "It is not the leverage," Nico roared, the control finally snapping. "It is you. It has always been you. Since the moment I saw you in that store, I have been terrified, not of losing my territory, not of dying. I am terrified of you getting hurt because I was selfish enough to want you near me." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vibrating. Jenna's lips parted, her anger vanishing into a sudden, dizzying rush of realization. He wasn't acting. The possession, the protection, the intensity. It wasn't a cover. "Nico," she whispered. He looked down at her, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with a mixture of fury and desperation. His gaze dropped to her mouth, and the air between them ignited. "I'm losing my mind," he muttered, and then he didn't hold back. Nico reached out, cupping her jaw with one large hand, his fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of her neck. He tilted her head back and crashed his lips onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was months of pent-up observation, weeks of silent watching, and days of terrifying danger all pouring out in a single moment. His lips were hot, demanding, moving against hers with a starving intensity. Jenna gasped, a sound that was swallowed by his mouth, and then she was melting. Her hands flew up, clutching the lapels of his jacket, pulling him closer. She opened to him, responding with a hunger that matched his own. The fear of the gala, the threat of the hit, the confusion of her life, it all dissolved into the heat of his body against hers. Nico groaned low in his throat, a vibration she felt against her own lips. His other hand slid down her spine, settling on the small of her back and pressing her firmly against him. She could feel the hard lines of his body, the power he held in check, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like the center of his world. The kiss deepened, slowing down, becoming heavy and drugged with sensation. He tasted of scotch and mint. His thumb stroked her cheekbone, a tender contrast to the desperate pressure of his mouth. Jenna arched into him, her fingers curling into his shirt, wanting to be closer than physics allowed. For a few seconds, there were no snipers, there were no contracts, there was only the rough slide of his hand on her silk dress and the overwhelming reality of him. They broke apart, gasping, their foreheads resting against each other. Jenna's eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her lips felt swollen, tingling with the ghost of his touch. Nico's breathing was ragged. He kept his hand on her jaw, his thumb brushing over her lower lip, his eyes searching her face with a stunning vulnerability. "Jenna," he whispered. His voice wrecked. They stared at each other in the dim light of the corridor. The silence was deafening. The line had been crossed. The cover story had been incinerated. This was real. And the realization was more terrifying than any gun. "Boss?" The voice shattered the moment like glass. Nico and Jenna sprang apart, turning toward the end of the hall. Marco was standing there, looking tense, his phone in his hand. He looked from Nico's flushed face to Jenna's disheveled state, and his expression tightened. "We have a problem," Marco said, his voice low. "One of the servers just tipped us off." Two men were asking questions about the woman in the black dress. They asked if she came in through the VIP entrance or the main door. "They are casing the exits." The bubble of intimacy burst instantly. The cold reality of their world rushed back in. Nico's face hardened, the mask slamming back into place, but his eyes lingered on Jenna for a second longer. Dark, heated, and full of a new, terrifying stake in the game. "We are leaving," Nico commanded, his voice ice cold. "Now." He reached for Jenna's hand. This time, when he took it, it wasn't just a guy to prop. He laced his fingers through hers, gripping tight. Jenna squeezed back, her heart pounding in her throat. As they walked back toward the danger, she could still taste him on her lips, and she knew, with a sinking, exhilarating certainty, that falling for Nico Varelli was the most dangerous thing she had done yet. But looking at his broad back as he shielded her from the room, she knew she was already falling. The illusion of safety shattered with the sound of breaking glass. It had been 2 days since the gala. 2 days of holding their breath, waiting for the fallout of Nico's public declaration, the safe house, which had felt like a fortress of steel and silence, suddenly felt fragile. Jenna was in the kitchen, staring into a mug of black coffee she had forgotten to drink. When the crash echoed through the loft, it came from the lower level, near the concealed service entrance that was supposed to be impenetrable. Nico was there before the sound had even faded. He moved with that terrifying, fluid speed that always reminded Jenna he was a weapon first and a man second. He vaulted over the back of the sofa, weapon drawn, signaling Marco to flank the left. Jenna stood frozen by the island counter, her heart hammering against her ribs. She set the mug down, her hands shaking so hard the ceramic clattered against the granite. "Clear," Marco shouted from the entryway. Jenna forced her legs to move, walking to the railing of the loft to look down. The heavy steel security door had not been breached, but the small, reinforced window set into the brickwork beside it had been smashed inward. Lying on the polished concrete floor, amidst a spray of glittering shards, was a brick. Wrapped around it was a piece of paper. Nico holstered his gun and crouched down. He didn't touch the brick with his bare hands. He used a handkerchief from his pocket to pry the paper loose, even from the top of the stairs. Jenna could see the tension radiating from his shoulders. The muscles of his back were coiled tight, visible through his white t-shirt. He stood up, reading the note. His expression did not change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What does it say?" Jenna asked, her voice echoing in the large space. Nico looked up at her. For a second, he looked like he was going to lie. He looked like he wanted to crumble the paper and throw it into the trash and tell her it was just a prank. But they had made a deal. Partners. No more secrets. "It says," Nico began, his voice flat and deadly, "that the dress looked expensive. It says they hope it is fireproof." Jenna felt the blood drain from her face. They weren't just threatening Nico anymore. They were commenting on her wardrobe. They were watching her close enough to see the texture of the silk. "They mentioned you by name," Marco added quietly, stepping closer to look at the note over Nico's shoulder. "They know she is here. Boss, the location is burned." "Get the cleanup crew," Nico ordered, crumpling the note in his fist. Reinforce the perimeter. Double the guard on the roof. No one sleeps tonight? Jenna backed away from the railing, the nausea rising in her throat. The gala was supposed to be a power move. It was supposed to show them that Nico was untouchable. Instead, it had just painted a target on her back brighter than neon. She spent the rest of the afternoon in a haze of guilt. She sat on the window seat in the library, watching the gray sky, feeling like a disease. She was the reason the brick came through the window. She was the reason Marco was pacing with a shotgun. She was the reason Nico looked like he hadn't slept in a week, his eyes rimmed with red, his jaw permanently clenched. It was late evening when she went to find Marco. He was in the makeshift command center they had set up in the dining area, staring at a bank of monitors. "Marco?" she said softly. He jumped slightly, then relaxed when he saw it was her. "Jenna, you should be in the back room. It is safer." "I'm tired of being safe," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "I want to know what is happening. Nico has been on the phone for an hour in the study. Is he negotiating?" Marco hesitated. He looked at the closed door of the study, then back at Jenna. He looked tired, too. The loyalty he held for Nico was absolute, but the strain was showing. "The Carvelli family reached out," Marco admitted, his voice low. "They offered a truce." Jenna's heart skipped a beat. "A truce? That is good, isn't it? That means the fighting stops." Marco shook his head slowly. "It is not that simple. They offered to cease all hostilities, return the shipping routes they stole, and drop the contracts on the lieutenants." "What did they want in exchange?" Jenna asked, though a cold knot was already forming in her stomach. "You," Marco said. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Jenna gripped the doorframe to keep herself upright. "Me? They demanded Nico hand over the girl," Marco said, his voice void of emotion but his eyes sympathetic. "They want to make an example of you, to show the city that Nico Varelli cannot protect what is his. If he gives you up, the war ends tonight. Everyone goes home safe, except you." "And what did Nico say?" Jenna whispered. "He hung up." Jenna turned and walked away. She didn't feel relief. She felt a surge of volcanic anger that was so hot it burned the tears out of her eyes before they could fall. She stormed into the kitchen. Nico was there, leaning over the sink, splashing cold water on his face. He looked exhausted, his hair dripping, the water soaking the collar of his shirt. He looked up as she entered, water droplets clinging to his eyelashes. "Jenna," he said, reaching for a towel, "I was just coming to find you. We need to move the sleeping arrangements. The guest room faces the street. It is not safe." "Stop," Jenna said, her voice shaking. "Just stop." Nico paused, the towel half raised to his face. He saw the look in her eyes, the fury, the terror, the betrayal, and he lowered his hand slowly. "What is it?" "Marco told me," she said, walking closer until she was standing on the other side of the island. "He told me about the call. He told me about the truce." Nico closed his eyes for a brief second, a muscle feathering in his jaw. "Marco talks too much. He told me that you could have ended this," Jenna accused, her voice rising. "He told me that everyone in this house, everyone on your payroll, is in danger right now because you refused to make a deal. It was not a deal," Nico snapped, opening his eyes. They were dark and stormy. "It was a ransom demand. They wanted me," Jenna shouted. "Me. I am the problem. Nico, I am the reason there is a brick on the floor and men with guns on the roof. If you gave me to them, your men would be safe. You would be safe. And you would be dead," Nico roared back. The sound of his voice, raw and thunderous, silenced the room. He tossed the towel onto the counter with enough force to knock over a salt shaker. "Do you think I am a monster?" Nico asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous, trembling growl. "Do you think I would trade you like a piece of property? Like a crate of contraband? Here, take the girl. Give me my shipping lanes back." "Is that who you think I am?" "I think you are a man who cares about winning," Jenna cried, tears finally spilling over. "I think you are so obsessed with not losing to the Carvellis that you are dragging this out. You are choosing war. Nico, you are choosing violence, and I am the excuse." Nico moved. He rounded the island in 2 strides, closing the distance between them. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. He looked wrecked. The carefully constructed mask of the Dawn was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he was bleeding out from the inside. "I'm not choosing war," he rasped, his voice breaking. "I am choosing you." Jenna froze. "What?" "I cannot do it," Nico said, shaking his head, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "I cannot stomach the thought of them laying a hand on you. The moment they said your name, the moment they suggested I hand you over—" He let out a sharp, incredulous laugh that sounded more like a sob. "I wanted to burn the entire city down just for asking." "Because I am your weakness?" Jenna asked softly, her anger wavering. "Because I am the symbol?" "No!" Nico shouted, then lowered his voice, stepping closer until his shoes bumped against hers. "Because you are the only thing in my life that makes sense. You are the only thing that is clean. You are the only thing that makes me want to be better than what I am." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Jenna stared up at him, her breath hitching in her throat. She searched his face for a lie, for the strategic manipulation she had come to expect, but she found nothing but raw, bleeding honesty. He wasn't looking at her like a prize or a pawn. He was looking at her like she was the oxygen in the room and he was suffocating. "Nico," she breathed, the anger drained out of her, leaving her feeling hollow and exposed. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to grow louder in the sudden silence. Nico reached out. His movement was hesitant, uncharacteristically unsure. His fingertips brushed against her cheek, catching a tear that was tracking down her jaw. His hand was trembling slightly. "I have spent my whole life in the dark," Nico whispered, his eyes searching hers. "I did not know how dark it was until you showed up with your sketchbooks and your stubbornness and your light. I cannot send you away, Jenna, not because of my pride, but because I do not know how to exist in a world where you are not safe." Jenna leaned into his touch. She couldn't help herself. The fight had exhausted her, and the warmth of his hand was the only anchor she had left. She closed her eyes, letting out a shaky breath. "You are going to get yourself killed," she whispered. "Then I die trying," Nico murmured. He stepped in, closing the remaining gap. He wrapped his arms around her, not with the possessive grip he used in public, but with a desperate, crushing hold. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing her in. Jenna's arms wound around his waist. She pressed her cheek against his chest. She could hear his heart thundering beneath the fabric of his shirt, a frantic, heavy rhythm that matched her own. For a long moment, they just stood there by the kitchen sink, the most dangerous man in the city, and the seamstress who had ruined him. His hand moved slowly up and down her back, a soothing, repetitive motion. "I will find a way out," Nico said into her hair, his voice muffled. "I swear to you, I will dismantle it, the business, the territory. I will burn it all if that is what it takes to get us out. I will find a way for us to leave." Jenna pulled back slightly, tilting her face up to look at him. "Do you mean that?" "Yes," Nico said. His gaze dropped to her lips. The air between them thickened, charging with a different kind of electricity. It wasn't the adrenaline of danger anymore. It was the heavy, magnetic pull of two people who had just stripped their souls bare. Nico's hand slid up to cup the back of her head. He leaned down. His lips hovered inches from hers. His breath was warm against her skin, tasting of coffee and desperation. Jenna's eyelids fluttered shut. She parted her lips, ready to meet him, ready to lose herself in the promise he had just made. "Weep, weep, weep." The shrill, piercing wail of the security alarm slashed through the room. They sprang apart as if physically struck. The intimacy vanished, replaced instantly by adrenaline. "Status," Nico barked, already moving toward the command center, his hand automatically going to the waistband where his gun was tucked. Jenna followed him, her heart leaping into her throat. "Is it an attack? Are they here?" They burst into the dining area. Marco was already typing furiously at the console, bringing up the external feeds. "It is not the perimeter alarm," Marco said, his face pale in the glow of the screens. "It is the news alert system. You set a keyword trigger for Jenna's address. "Put it on the main screen," Nico ordered. Marco hit a key, and the large monitor on the wall flickered to life. It was a live news broadcast. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking news, explosion in residential district." Jenna gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. On the screen was a building engulfed in flames. Orange and black smoke billowed into the night sky, blotting out the stars. Fire trucks were surrounding the structure, their hoses spraying useless arcs of water into the inferno. It was her building. "No," Jenna whispered, the sound barely audible. "No, no, no." "The fire started approximately 20 minutes ago," the news anchor was saying. "Authorities suspect a gas leak in a third-floor apartment triggered the blast. Tenants were evacuated, but the structure is likely a total loss." The camera zoomed in on a window. Her window. Flames were licking out of it, consuming the peeling paint, the flower box she had struggled to keep alive, the cheap curtains she had sewn herself. "It was not a gas leak," Nico said, his voice cold as the grave. "It was an incendiary device." Jenna stared at the screen, her vision blurring. It wasn't just wood and brick burning. It was her father's watch, sitting in the top drawer of her nightstand. It was the stack of sketchbooks under her bed, 5 years of designs, of dreams, of the portfolio she was going to use to apply to design school. It was the photo album on the shelf, the only pictures she had of her parents together before the accident. It was her sewing machine, the one her mother had bought her with her first paycheck after the factory closed. It was everything. The Carvellis hadn't just threatened her life. They had erased her. They had burned away every trace of Jenna Cole until there was nothing left but the clothes on her back and the man standing next to her. "They did this," Jenna said, her voice trembling with a rage so profound it felt like it was cracking her ribs. "They burned it all. I will kill them," Nico vowed, his hand gripping the back of Marco's chair so hard the leather creaked. "I will hunt down every single person who lit a match." "It does not matter," Jenna screamed, spinning around to face him. "It is gone. Nico, my dad's things are gone. My work is gone. You cannot shoot the fire. You cannot kill the ashes." She felt suffocated. The walls of the safe house, the steel doors, the monitors, it all felt like a cage. She was trapped in his world, and his world was eating hers alive. "I have to go," Jenna said, panic rising in her chest. "You cannot go," Nico said, stepping toward her. "Jenna, look at the screen. They want you to run. They want you out in the open." "I do not care," she cried. She turned and ran toward the bedroom, not the guest room, but the room where she had left her duffel bag. She grabbed the bag, shoving her few remaining possessions into it blindly. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She needed air. She needed to get away from the monitors, away from the news, away from him. Nico was in the doorway before she could zip the bag. "Jenna, stop," he pleaded, blocking her exit. "You are not thinking clearly. If you walk out that door, you are dead." "I'm already dead," Jenna shouted, pushing past him. He caught her wrist, his grip firm but careful. "Let me go," she struggled, trying to wrench her arm free. "I refuse to live like this. I refuse to be a prisoner in a warehouse while my life burns down on television." "I'm trying to keep you alive," Nico begged, his eyes fierce and desperate. "Please, just stay here. Just give me tonight." "No!" Jenna tore her wrist free with a strength born of pure adrenaline. She backed away toward the main door, clutching her bag to her chest. "I love you." The words ripped out of her throat before she could stop them. Nico froze. The desperation on his face shifted into shock. "I love you," Jenna repeated, crying openly now. "God help me. I love you, and that is why I have to leave. Jenna." Nico took a step forward, his hand outstretched. "No," she sobbed, backing up until her hand hit the cold steel of the door handle. "Loving you feels like sacrificing every part of myself. I have lost my home. I have lost my past. If I stay here, I will lose my mind." She yanked the door open. The alarm system chirped a warning, a sterile sound in the emotional chaos. "Jenna, please." Nico's voice broke. He looked shattered. The man who commanded armies looked like a lost boy. "Do not follow me," Jenna whispered. "If you care about me, do not follow me." She slipped out into the cold night air, the heavy door slamming shut between them. severing the connection before he could stop her. Nico stood alone in the hallway, the echo of her confession and the slam of the door ringing in his ears. He stared at the steel barrier, his hand still reached out, fingers curling into a fist as he realized that for all his power, for all his guns and money, he had just lost the only thing that mattered. The neon sign of the motel flickered with a rhythmic, electric buzzing sound that Jenna had started to use as a metronome for her anxiety. It was a cheap place on the edge of the industrial district, the kind of establishment where people paid in cash and asked no questions. It was exactly the sort of place Jenna Cole never thought she would call home. But for the last 3 days, Room 12 had been her entire world. She sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, staring at the burner phone Marco had slipped into her pocket right before she walked out of the safe house. It was a blocky, outdated model that felt heavy in her hand. She had not turned it on. To turn it on felt like an admission that she was not as free as she pretended to be. Instead, she lived in a terrifying limbo. She'd gone back to the clothing store, begging her manager for shifts under the guise that her apartment fire had left her scrambling for cash. The manager, pitying the dark circles under her eyes, had put her on the closing rotation. It was a mistake. Every customer who walked through the glass doors made Jenna's heart slam against her ribs. She found herself scanning waistbands for the bulge of a weapon. She watched reflections in the shop windows. She analyzed shoes. Heavy boots meant trouble. Running shoes meant a scout. Nico had taught her how to look, and now she could not stop seeing the danger woven into the fabric of the ordinary world. She also saw the black sedan parked across the street. It was always there. Sometimes it was a gray coupe, sometimes a delivery van, but the presence was constant. Nico's men. She hated them. She needed them. The contradiction tore at her chest every time she walked to the bus stop, keeping her head down, feeling the weight of invisible eyes on her back. Across the city, Nico Varelli was tearing the underworld apart. He sat in the back of his armored SUV, watching a warehouse burn. It was one of the Carvelli family's primary distribution hubs for counterfeit goods. His men had hit it 20 minutes ago, swift and brutal. "Boss," Marco said from the front seat, his voice cautious. "We have secured the perimeter. No casualties on our side." Nico did not answer. He was staring at the flames, but he was not seeing the fire. He was seeing Jenna's face as she backed away from him. He was hearing her say she loved him in the same breath she said she had to leave him. The self-loathing was a physical weight in his gut, heavier than the gun in his holster. He wanted to drive to the motel. He wanted to kick down the door of room 12 and drag her back to the fortress where she was safe. He wanted to wrap her in his arms and refuse to let go, but he stayed away. He knew that if he saw her, if he smelled her scent and looked into her terrified, defiant eyes, he would never have the strength to let her walk away again. And he had promised her independence. He had promised not to treat her like property. So he burned his enemies instead, channeling his heartbreak into a warpath that was turning the streets red. "Drive," Nico ordered, his voice like gravel. "We hit the next location in 1 hour." The distance Nico placed between them, meant to be a mercy, became the crack in the armor that the Carvellis were waiting for. It happened on a Tuesday evening. The rain was falling in sheets, turning the city into a blurred watercolor of gray and black. Jenna was closing the register at the store, her hands moving mechanically over the receipts. When the store phone rang, she picked it up. "Style Haven, this is Jenna." "Jenna, oh God, Jenna, you have to help me." It was Lauren, Jenna's coworker, the bubbly girl who usually talked about her boyfriend and nail polish colors. Now, her voice was high, tight, and bordering on hysteria. "Lauren," Jenna gripped the phone tighter. "What is it? Where are you?" "I'm at the old lot near the stadium," Lauren sobbed. I think someone is following me. A car has been behind me for miles. I pulled off to lose them, but they stopped at the exit. I am scared to get out of the car. You are the only person I knew who was working tonight. Please." "Jenna, I do not know what to do. Did you call the police?" Jenna asked, her training kicking in. "My phone is dying," Lauren wailed. Please, just come get me. My car will not start. I am all alone out here." Jenna looked at the black sedan parked across the street from the store. She knew she should walk out there and knock on the window. She knew she should tell Nico's men. But if she did that, she was admitting she belonged to Nico. She was admitting she couldn't handle a frightened friend without the Mafia holding her hand. "I am coming," Jenna said. "Stay in the car. Lock the doors." She hung up and grabbed her coat. She slipped out the back exit of the store, avoiding the front window where the watchers were stationed. It was a foolish, reckless act of rebellion, fueled by the desperate need to be the hero of her own story for once. She took a taxi to the stadium lot. It was a desolate expanse of cracked asphalt, lit by a single flickering streetlight. The rain hammered against the roof of the cab as Jenna paid the driver and stepped out. "Lauren?" she called out, squinting through the downpour. She saw Lauren's small Honda parked near the back fence. Lauren was standing outside the car, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering violently. "Jenna!" Lauren cried out, relief washing over her face. Jenna ran toward her, splashing through puddles. "Get in the cab! I told the driver to wait!" She stopped. Lauren wasn't looking at her anymore. She was looking at the ground, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," Lauren whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "They said they would hurt my sister. I am so sorry." The realization hit Jenna a second too late. The sliding door of a dark van parked in the shadows behind the Honda flew open. 3 men in tactical gear surged out. Jenna spun around to run, but a hand clamped over her mouth, pulling her back against a hard chest. She kicked and thrashed, biting down on the gloved hand, but a needle pricked her neck. A hood was shoved over her head, plunging her world into darkness. "Secure her," a voice barked. She was lifted off her feet and thrown into the back of the van. The last thing she heard before the doors slammed shut was the sound of Lauren sobbing in the rain, alone in the empty lot. At the safe house, the silence was shattered by a curse that made the walls shake. "We lost the signal," Marco shouted, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Nico, who had been cleaning his weapon at the table, was on his feet instantly. "What do you mean you lost it?" "The burner phone," Marco said, his face pale. She turned it on for 3 seconds, and then it went dead. The GPS pinged near the stadium, then vanished. "Someone is jamming the frequency." Nico stared at the screen. The dot that represented Jenna's life was gone, the control he had maintained for years. The icy discipline that made him a leader. Fractured. It didn't crack. It exploded. He swept the gun cleaning kit off the table with a roar of pure, unadulterated fury. Metal parts scattered across the floor with a clatter that sounded like gunfire. "They have her," Nico said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "While I was busy burning their money, they took her." "Boss, we have the raid on the shipping yard scheduled for—" "Cancel it," Nico ordered, walking toward the weapons locker. He didn't look like a general anymore. He looked like a man possessed. "Cancel everything. Pull every man from the street. I want eyes on every road, every bridge, every tunnel." "Where do we start?" Marco asked, grabbing his own vest. "The signal jammer," Nico said, racking the slide of a fresh pistol. "Only one crew in the city has access to military-grade jamming tech that works that fast." "It is not the Carvellis. It is the traitor." Nico's mind worked with laser precision, cutting through the red haze of his rage. The warehouse where he had been keeping his surplus supplies, the Riverside facility, was under the name of a shell company managed by Lorenzo. "The Riverside warehouse," Nico said. "They took her to my own property." The drive was a blur of speed and violation of traffic laws. Nico did not speak. He did not blink. He drove with one hand on the wheel and the other gripping his phone, coordinating a strike team that was moving to converge on the river. They arrived at the perimeter of the abandoned warehouse. It was dark, silent and imposing against the stormy sky. "Heat signatures inside," Marco reported, looking at a tablet linked to a drone overhead. 5 hostiles, 1 stationary target in the center. "That is her," Nico said. He didn't wait for the team to stack up. He didn't wait for a plan. He kicked the side door open and moved into the darkness. Inside, the warehouse smelled of rust and damp earth. In the center of the vast, empty space, A single work light illuminated a chair. Jenna was tied to it. Her head was lolling forward, her hair matted with rain and sweat. There was a dark bruise blossoming on her cheekbone. Standing over her was Rafe, the Carvelli enforcer, a man with a reputation for enjoying his work too much. "Wake up, princess," Rafe sneered, tapping her face with the barrel of his gun. "Your boyfriend isn't coming. He's too busy counting his money." Jenna lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were swollen, but there was a fire in them that Rafe couldn't extinguish. "He is coming," she rasped, spitting blood onto the concrete floor. "And when he gets here, you are going to wish you were in jail." Rafe laughed. "He abandoned you in a motel. Sweetheart, you are nothing to him but a loose end." The metal door at the far end of the warehouse didn't open. It disintegrated. The explosion blew the hinges inward with a deafening boom. Through the smoke and debris, Nico Varelli emerged. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing tactical gear, his face smeared with soot, his eyes burning with a violence that promised death. "Get away from her!" Nico roared. Rafe spun around, raising his weapon, but he was too slow. Nico fired 2 shots, precise and lethal, dropping the guard standing near the pillar. Chaos erupted. The other 3 men in the shadows opened fire. Bullets sparked against the concrete floor and pinged off the steel beams. Nico didn't take cover. He ran. He sprinted straight through the line of fire. His eyes locked on Jenna. He reached the chair just as the wood splintered near her head from a stray bullet. "Nico!" Jenna screamed. He threw his body over hers, shielding her with his own bulk. He fired blindly over his shoulder, suppressing the shooters, while his other hand drew a knife from his belt. With one savage motion, he slashed the ropes binding her wrists. "Get down!" he shouted, dragging her off the chair and behind a stack of rotting shipping crates. Jenna collapsed against him, her hands grabbing his vest. He felt solid, real, and terrified. "You came," she sobbed, the adrenaline finally crashing into her system. "I told you," Nico gritted out, reloading his weapon with shaking hands. "I told you I would burn it all down." He popped up, firing 3 controlled bursts. A scream echoed from the darkness. Marco and the strike team had breached the side entrance, flanking the remaining shooters. The sound of gunfire reached a crescendo and then, abruptly, fell silent. "Clear!" Marco's voice rang out. Nico didn't care. He dropped his gun and turned to Jenna. He grabbed her face between his hands, his fingers smearing blood and soot on her skin as he frantically scanned her for injuries. "Did they shoot you?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Jenna, look at me. Look. Are you hit?" "No," she wept, shaking her head. "I am okay. They hit me. Rafe hit me." Nico looked at the bruise on her cheek, and a fresh wave of fury darkened his eyes, but he pushed it down. He needed her to be alive more than he needed to kill Rafe again. "I have you," he whispered. "I have you." He pulled her into him, crushing her mouth to his. It wasn't a romantic kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of copper and salt and terror. He kissed her like he was trying to breathe life back into himself. Jenna clung to him, her fingers digging into his shoulders, anchoring herself to the only thing in the world that felt safe. "We need to move," Marco said gently, appearing beside them. "Police will be here in 3 minutes." Nico broke the kiss but didn't let go of her. He scooped her up into his arms, carrying her out of the warehouse as if she weighed nothing. Jenna buried her face in his neck, closing her eyes against the flashing lights of the approaching sirens. They didn't go back to the safe house. It was compromised. Marco drove them to a small, anonymous motel 20 miles out of town, a different kind of motel, one that felt like the end of the world. The room was quiet. The only sound was the hum of the heater and the distant wail of sirens fading into the night. Jenna sat on the edge of the bed. She had showered, washing away the grime of the warehouse, and was wearing one of Nico's spare t-shirts that reached her knees. She looked small, fragile, and incredibly beautiful. Nico sat on the floor in front of her. He had a first aid kit open. He took an ice pack wrapped in a towel and gently pressed it to her cheek. His hands, which had dealt death less than an hour ago, were trembling with tenderness. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the bruise. "I should have been there. I should never have let you leave. I left you," Jenna corrected him softly. She reached out, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "I thought I could go back to being normal. I thought if I just pretended hard enough, the monsters would go away." "The monsters do not go away," Nico said, leaning his face into her palm. "You have to fight them." "I know," Jenna said. Her voice shook, but her eyes were clear. "When I was in that chair, when Rafe told me you weren't coming, I didn't care about dying. I cared that the last thing I ever said to you was, 'Don't follow me.'" She took a ragged breath. "Trying to live without you for 3 days felt like cutting off my own arm. I hated it. I hated every second of being safe if it meant being alone." Nico looked up at her. The vulnerability in his expression was absolute. He shifted, rising to his knees so his face was level with her chest. He rested his forehead against her thighs, letting out a long, shuddering sigh of surrender. "I do not know how to be a good man, Jenna," he confessed into the fabric of her shirt. "I have been a weapon since I was 15 years old. I do not know how to be gentle. I do not know how to be what you need." "You came for me," Jenna whispered, stroking his hair. "You shielded me. That is a good man." "I want to learn," Nico said, lifting his head to look at her. "If you will have me, if you can stand to look at me after what I did tonight. I want to learn how to be yours." "I am already yours," Jenna said. "I think I have been yours since you put on my sweater." A ghost of a smile touched Nico's lips. He stood up slowly and climbed onto the bed beside her. He didn't try to take things further. He just pulled her down with him, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. Jenna tangled her fingers with his. They lay face to face, foreheads touching, breathing in the same rhythm. "I love you," Nico whispered into the space between them. "I love you too," Jenna replied. He kissed her then. It was slow, lingering, and full of promise. It was a kiss that sealed a pact. There was desire there, burning hot and heavy, but it was overshadowed by the aching, overwhelming relief of simply being alive. Outside. The storm had passed. Inside, wrapped in the thin motel blanket, Jenna finally closed her eyes and slept, knowing that the man holding her would burn the world down before he let anything wake her up. The morning sun sliced through the thin curtains of the motel room, casting stripes of pale gold across the bedspread. It was a quiet, unassuming light, the kind that promised a normal Tuesday, oblivious to the violence of the night before. Jenna stirred, her body aching with a dull, heavy fatigue, but the panic that had lived in her chest for days was gone. In its place was a solid, comforting weight. She opened her eyes to find Nico's arm draped over her waist, his breathing slow and steady against her neck. She shifted slightly, turning to face him. In the daylight, he looked younger. The harsh lines of command that usually etched his forehead were smoothed out by sleep. There were bruises on his bare forearms, souvenirs from the warehouse, and a small cut on his lip. But he looked peaceful. Nico opened his eyes. There was no moment of disorientation, no reaching for a weapon. He simply focused on her face, his dark eyes clearing instantly. "Good morning," he rasped, his voice thick with sleep. "Good morning," Jenna whispered back. They shared a smile. It was small, fragile, and terrified of breaking, but it was real. For a moment, they weren't a mafia boss and a seamstress. They were just two people who had survived the dark. Nico reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw where the bruise from Rafe was beginning to bloom purple. His expression darkened with guilt, but Jenna covered his hand with hers, stopping him from spiraling. "I am okay," she said firmly. "We are okay." Nico exhaled slowly, pulling her closer until their foreheads touched. "We are alive, but we are not safe yet. We need to talk." Jenna nodded against him. "About the contract? About the traitor?" Nico corrected. He sat up, resting his back against the headboard, pulling the sheet up to his waist. "I went through the data Marco pulled from the warehouse security system. The hit was never just about the Carvellis. They are brutal, but they are not clever enough to rewrite a Varelli contract from the inside. They had help." "Who?" Jenna asked, sitting up beside him, clutching the oversized t-shirt around her knees. Lorenzo, Nico said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Bianca's brother. He has been my second in command for 3 years. He's been feeding the Carvellis information on my movements, my safe houses, and my weaknesses. Jenna's eyes widened. That is why Bianca was so confident at the gala. She knew you were being undermined. Yes, Nico said grimly. And the warehouse where they took you. It is listed under a shell company. I recognize the tax ID this morning. It belongs to Lorenzo. He sold you out. Jenna, he told them where the burner phone was. He told them you were the pressure point to break me. Jenna felt a cold chill run down her spine, but it was quickly replaced by a spark of anger. She was done being the victim. She was done being the pressure point. So what do we do? She asked. I go to the auction tonight, Nico said, his voice turning hard. Lorenzo is hosting a high-stakes underground auction at the Obsidian Club. He thinks I am scrambling to hide you. He thinks I am broken. I am going to walk in there and put a bullet in his chest. No, Jenna said. Nico looked at her, surprised. Jenna, he kidnapped you. He burned your home. And if you walk in there shooting, his security will cut you down before you reach the door. Jenna argued, her mind racing. You said it yourself. He expects you to be a brute force. He expects the Mafia boss who breaks things. What are you suggesting? Nico asked, watching her with narrowed eyes. I am suggesting we change the narrative, Jenna said. Swinging her legs off the bed, she stood up, pacing the small room, her mind working through fabrics and silhouettes. He expects you to come in tactical gear or a heavy suit, ready for war. He does not expect you to walk in as a ghost. A ghost? We are going to walk right past his security, Jenna said, turning to him with a fierce determination. I am going to style us. I am going to alter the perception of everyone in that room. We are not going to be Nico Varelli and his girlfriend. We are going to be buyers, and we are going to take him down from the inside. Nico watched her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the way her hands moved as she visualized the plan. He didn't see a fragile girl who needed protection anymore. He saw a partner. Okay, Nico said slowly, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. Tell me what you need. 3 hours later, they were in a secondary safe house, a small basement apartment Marco had secured. The air was thick with the smell of steam and starch. Jenna was working with a frantic, surgical precision. She had sent Marco out with a list of very specific items: a high-collar velvet coat, thick-rimmed glasses, a wig, and a sewing kit. Now, she was on her knees, pinning the hem of Nico's trousers. Stand still, she murmured, a needle between her lips. Nico stood obediently in the center of the room. He was wearing a turtleneck and a structured velvet jacket that completely changed the line of his shoulders, making him look less like a brawler and more like an eccentric European art dealer. This feels tight, Nico grumbled, adjusting the collar. It is supposed to be, Jenna said, removing the needle. It changes your posture. You usually walk with your chest out, leading with aggression. This coat forces you to roll your shoulders forward slightly. It makes you look intellectual, not physical. No one will look at you and see the enforcer. She stood up and stepped back, critical eyes scanning her work. She had done the same for herself. A severe, high-neck dress and a sharp, angular bob wig that hid her soft features. She looked severe, professional, and entirely unrecognizable. Nico walked over to the mirror. He stared at his reflection, tilting his head. I do not recognize myself. That is the point, Jenna said, packing away her needles. We walk in. We find Lorenzo. We get close before he even knows the Reaper is in the room. Nico turned to her. The admiration in his eyes was so potent it almost knocked the wind out of her. He crossed the room and stood behind her as she checked her own reflection in the dusty mirror. He slid his arms around her waist, pulling her back against him. He rested his chin on her shoulder, their eyes meeting in the glass. The disguise couldn't hide the intensity of the connection between them. You are incredible, Nico whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I'm just a seamstress, Jenna said, her breath hitching. You are so much more than that, Nico murmured. He pressed a kiss to the side of her neck. right below the wig line. "Whatever happens tonight, Jenna, I want you to know something." "What?" "I'm grateful," he said softly. "I'm grateful I walked into your store. I'm grateful I watched you from the street like a fool. And I'm grateful I ever put on your clothes." Jenna laughed, a wet, teary sound. "Even the leggings?" "Especially the leggings." Nico smiled against her skin. "Because it led me here. To you." He turned her around in his arms, his expression sobering. "Stay close to me tonight. If I give the signal, you run. You do not look back. You run." "I am not running," Jenna promised, gripping his lapels. "We finish this together." The Obsidian Club was a cavern of shadows and gold leaf, hidden beneath an old theater in the city center. The air was heavy with cigar smoke and the scent of expensive bourbon. The room was filled with the city's criminal elite, men and women who traded in secrets, weapons, and lives. Jenna walked in on Nico's arm. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her face was a mask of bored indifference. Behind the thick-rimmed glasses, Nico looked scholarly and unassuming. They moved through the crowd. Jenna played her role perfectly. She was the stylist, the assistant, the person who made things run smoothly. She fussed over Nico's cuff, using the motion to whisper into his ear. "Security at the north exit," she murmured, brushing lint off his shoulder. "2 men, heavily armed." "Copy," Nico whispered back. "Lorenzo is on the mezzanine," Jenna added, her eyes darting upward behind her dark glasses. "He's drinking champagne. He looks comfortable. He won't be for long," Nico said. They worked their way through the room, blending in, becoming part of the background noise. Jenna used her knowledge of the layout. She had studied the blueprints Marco found to guide them toward the stairs that led to the VIP section. As they reached the top of the stairs, the air shifted. Lorenzo was holding court at a large circular table, surrounded by his personal guards. He was laughing, a glass of vintage scotch in his hand, looking like a man who had just won a kingdom. Nico and Jenna approached the table. "Gentlemen," Nico said, his voice pitched slightly higher, the accent clipped and foreign. "I believe you have an item up for bid that belongs to me." Lorenzo looked up, annoyed. "This is a private table. Who are you?" Nico smiled. It was a cold, terrifying expression that didn't reach his eyes. He reached up and slowly removed the thick-rimmed glasses. He straightened his spine, shaking off the posture Jenna had sewn into the coat. "Hello, Lorenzo," Nico said, his voice dropping back to its natural, lethal rumble. Lorenzo's face went white. He dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound echoing through the sudden silence. "Nico," Lorenzo gasped. "Kill him!" The guards moved instantly. 3 men raised their weapons. Jenna didn't think. She didn't freeze. She acted. She was carrying a large, structured garment bag, part of her cover as the stylist. As the guard closest to Nico raised his gun, Jenna swung the bag with all her strength. The heavy, metal-reinforced bottom of the bag slammed into the guard's arm, knocking his aim wide. The gun went off, the bullet shattering a bottle of vodka on the bar behind them. The distraction was all Nico needed. He moved in a blur. He disarmed the guard Jenna had struck, spun him around, and used him as a shield while he leveled his own weapon at Lorenzo's head. "Nobody moves," Nico roared, "or the traitor dies first." The music cut out. The room froze. Every gun in the place was drawn, but Nico had the high ground, and he had the barrel of his pistol pressed against Lorenzo's sweating forehead. "Call them off," Nico ordered, jamming the gun harder into Lorenzo's temple. "Stand down," Lorenzo shrieked, his voice cracking. "Do not shoot." The guards hesitated, weapons still raised. "You have 2 choices, Lorenzo," Nico said, his voice calm and cold. "Choice 1. I paint this wall with your brains, and we see who walks out of here alive. Choice 2. You pull out your phone and you transfer the digital file of the contract, the one with the edits you made, to my secure server." I do not know what you are talking about," Lorenzo stammered. "Do not lie to me," Nico hissed. Jenna found the trail. "We know you sold the location. We know you sold her. Transfer the file now." With shaking hands, Lorenzo reached into his pocket. He tapped the screen, tears of fear leaking from his eyes. A moment later, Nico's phone buzzed in his pocket. "Marco has it," Nico said. "It is verified." "Okay, you have the proof," Lorenzo pleaded. "Now let me go. We are family." "Nico." "We were family," Nico said. "Now, you are just a liability." The room held its breath, expecting the execution. Jenna watched, her hands trembling, wondering if the man she loved was about to become a murderer in front of her eyes. Nico lowered the gun. He stepped back, shoving Lorenzo away with disgust. "I am not going to kill you, Lorenzo," Nico announced, his voice carrying to the rafters of the silent club. Lorenzo blinked, confused. You are not." "No," Nico said. He pulled out his own phone and held it up. "Because killing you is too easy. Instead, I just forwarded the proof of your betrayal to the Carvelli family, and I sent a copy to every capo in the Varelli organization." Lorenzo's eyes bulged. "You did what?" "They know you played both sides," Nico said, buttoning his jacket with a calm, deliberate motion. "They know you stole from the Carvellis to pay me, and you stole from me to pay them. You are a man without a flag, Lorenzo, and the wolves are hungry." Lorenzo looked at his phone, which had started to buzz incessantly. He looked at the exit, terror dawning on him. "I'm stepping down," Nico announced to the room. "The Varelli territory is open. Do what you want with it, but anyone who comes after me, or the woman standing next to me, will deal with a ghost who knows where all the bodies are buried." He turned to Jenna, extending his hand. "Ready?" Jenna took his hand. "Ready." They didn't run. They walked. They walked past the stunned guards, past the terrified Lorenzo, who was already frantically dialing numbers that wouldn't answer, and out the service door into the cool night air. They moved quickly down the alley, their fingers entwined, putting distance between themselves and the life Nico had just incinerated. "You let him live," Jenna said, her voice full of wonder as they reached the end of the block. "He's dead already," Nico said simply. "The streets will take care of him. I did not want his blood on my hands. Not tonight." He stopped under a streetlight and turned to her. He looked lighter, as if a heavy coat had been stripped from his shoulders. "What does this mean?" Jenna asked. "Stepping down? Can you really just walk away?" "I've been moving money into clean accounts for months," Nico admitted. "Investments. Real estate. VC Atelier." "VC Atelier?" Jenna asked, confused. "Varelli and Cole." Nico smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "It is a legitimate business, fully funded, waiting for a head designer." "You did that?" Jenna whispered. "I told you," Nico said intensely. "I wanted to find a way out. I'm going to dismantle the rest of the network from the shadows. I will hand over the evidence to the authorities anonymously. I will burn the throne so no one can sit on it. It will be dangerous for a while. We will have to look over our shoulders." "I'm good at looking over my shoulder," Jenna said. "I know," Nico said, pulling her close. "But from now on, you only have to look forward, because a life where you are a target is no life I want. I choose you, Jenna. I choose us." 6 months later, the coastal town was small, sleepy, and smelled of salt and pine. It was a place where people didn't lock their doors, and the biggest news was the high tide. On the main street, a small boutique with a sleek minimalist sign reading VC Atelier had a line out the door. Inside, Jenna Cole was pinning a dress on a bride, laughing as she worked. She looked different. The dark circles were gone. Her movements were light, unburdened. When the last customer left, she flipped the sign to closed and locked the door. She walked up the stairs to the apartment above the shop. It was cozy, filled with plants and books, a smaller, safer version of the loft they had left behind. "I am home," Jenna called out, kicking off her shoes. "In here," a deep voice replied from the living room. Jenna walked in and stopped dead. A laugh bubbled up in her chest, bright and uncontrollable. Nico was standing in the middle of the rug. He was holding a spatula, and he was wearing her gray oversized cable-knit sweater and a pair of black leggings. He spun around, striking a ridiculous, high-fashion pose, jutting his hip out. "Well," he asked, deadpan, "how is the silhouette? I feel like the winter collection is really speaking to me." Jenna burst into laughter, doubling over, clutching her stomach. "You look ridiculous." "I think I look chic," Nico countered, walking over to her. The leggings were stretched to their limit over his muscular thighs, and the sweater was tight across his chest, but he wore them with the confidence of a king. "My modeling fees are very high, you know." "You are an idiot," Jenna gasped, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "I am your idiot." Nico corrected her gentle. The humor in his eyes softened into something warmer, deeper. He stepped close, wrapping her in his arms. The familiar scratchy wool of the sweater against her cheek brought a rush of memories. The fear of that first night, the gun on the dresser, the terror of the unknown. But now, it just felt like safety. Nico rested his forehead against hers. "You know," he murmured, his voice rumbling in his chest. "The first time I wore this, I did it to survive. I did it because I had to hide." "And now?" Jenna asked, looking up into his eyes. "Now," Nico said, tightening his hold on her. "I do it because it smells like you. I do it because your clothes, your scent, your world, they are the only things that truly feel like home." Jenna smiled, her heart swelling until she thought it might burst. "Welcome home, Nico." He kissed her. It was a slow, lingering kiss, tasting of the dinner he was cooking and the ocean breeze coming through the window. It was a blend of passion, relief, and quiet joy. There were no sirens in the distance. There were no guards at the door. There was just the two of them, standing in a pool of evening light, held together by the fierce, chosen love they had fought so hard to protect. Jenna pulled back, grabbing his hand. "Come on, supermodel, let's eat. I have a new design for a jacket I want to show you." "Does it have a holster?" Nico asked, letting her lead him to the kitchen. "No," Jenna said firmly. "It has pockets for snacks." "Perfect," Nico said. And together, they walked into the kitchen to bicker, to eat, and to plan a future that belonged only to them. Thank you so much for reading this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Jenna and Nico from that terrifying night in the apartment to their quiet life by the sea. I would love to know what you thought of the ending. Did Nico's fashion show in the final scene make you smile? Please leave a comment below letting me know where you are reading from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more passionate, thrilling, and emotional tales. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments.